Yeah, we're live. Excellent. So, Luke Ming Flanagan, welcome along to the Martin's World podcast on what is, I suppose, a very significant day today. Oops, my phone is actually repeating my voice behind me. But
That's
today,
all right. I'm
today,
not a then, no.
no. Today is the 5th of November, and I don't know if back then if V for Vendetta was even out, but it was kind of funny how that worked out. It was in V for Vendetta, the 5th of November was quite a significant day. Remember the 5th of November. So it kind of worked out nicely, poetically, if you will. But on that day, 20 years ago, in an act of civil disobedience, which is something that's been very at the forefront of my vocabulary lately. You sent cannabis joints to all of the TDs across the island of Ireland. Um, can you just tell me, like, how did you set about that pathway in life? What activated you to become an activist all those years ago?
Well, I had never ever had any dealings with the Garda Síochána up until I started smoking cannabis. I'd never done anything out of the way or anything particularly wrong. And when I started using cannabis, I basically attracted the attention of the Garda Síochána, and I seen other people were affected by it. And I thought to myself, that needs to change. And I'd always been interested in politics anyway. So the way I looked at it was, there's the best way to do this is to go out and put your name on the ballot paper. So
Right.
from I suppose from 1997 onwards, I have been politically involved when it comes to trying to repeal the prohibition of cannabis. But in relation to that particular day, I had thought of doing this for quite a while. I'd actually put together a plan for a national legalized cannabis day in my own town of Castlerea. I put together a proposal whereby we would hold a series of events in all the public houses around Castlerea. And I put together a proposal and then went to various different businesses in the town. And looking back, I have to say, it's good to be naive, actually, because you never try anything if you're not a little bit naive. But looking back, maybe it was a little bit naive to think that they would have went for it. I also looked at another venue outside my town, and they were interested in it as well, but they were worried about how it might affect their license in the future. So that was back in about 1998, 1999. And then I come up with the idea of, rather than holding an actual event that people would go to, that I would do something that just totally depended on me to do it. I wasn't going to be putting anyone else in trouble, and I didn't need to book a venue so that subsequently that venue might have problems as a result of it, or be targeted as a result of it. So I decided that I was going to hold a national legalized cannabis day whereby I would carry out a particular action. And actually, the year before, in the year 2000, I had put together another plan, a plan that would have involved planting cannabis plants in Stephen's Green. And that year, Woody Harrelson actually came to visit Galway. I think he was launching some film about cannabis prohibition. And I discovered that he was going to be doing the press stuff in, I think it was Jury's Hotel in Galway, where I lived at the time. So I typed up this proposal of what I was going to do. And I thought to myself, you know what, if I can get this to him, it'll give it a bit of a lift. Obviously, it should give it a bit of a lift, because in comparison to who knew me, thousands of times more people knew who he was. So I never actually got to him, and I gave it to one of his handlers, and I never heard anything back. Circumstances with myself meant that I didn't actually do it that year, and I forgot all about that particular idea, that I'd even approached him. Didn't really enter my head again. So the following year, in 2001, I set about putting together the plan, which was to post joints to every TD, every senator, and over 200 journalists. So in order to do that, and I didn't have much money, I was going to have to grow it myself. And following on from my philosophy, which was I have nothing to hide, I grew the plants in my front garden in Castlereagh. Now, it's down a country lane, but there's plenty of houses around me. And basically, I grew the plants there that summer and basically harvested them. And the actual grass that I put in the joints, the vast majority of it was just leaf. So basically sat down in it used to be a funeral home, the place that I lived in. It was converted. So I sat down in my new little house that I was renting in Castlereagh and basically set about rolling about over 400 joints. They were all one skinners, except for certain ones that I put together. For example, the one I sent to Eamon Dunphy wasn't a one skinner. The one that I sent to BP Fallon wasn't a one skinner. The one that I sent to Dave Fanning wasn't a one skinner, but mostly they were one skinners. So the idea was that I would create a frenzy on the day of discussion about the topic of repealing cannabis. So to all of the TDs, I typed up a letter with my name on it and a logo I found on the internet at the time, a cannabis leaf in a fist. And in the letters to the elected representatives, I basically wrote that I am sending you this cannabis joint to let you know that it's National Legalized Cannabis Day. I think it's important to inform you that you now have in your possession an illegal substance and you should bring it to your local Garda station. So the idea behind that was it set off a bit of a chain reaction there. I also sent it to around 200 journalists, but in that letter, what I wrote was, I'm sending you this cannabis joint in order that you can celebrate National Legalized Cannabis Day, enjoy the smoke. So as a result of it, obviously it drew a lot of attention, but there was one last piece that I had to do, and that was to present a cannabis plant to the then Minister for, really, really well titled name for a minister, for recreation and drug use. Basically, he was Owen Ryan was his name. So I had, it's actually funny what I gave him in the end. I brought the plant basically with me up to Dublin. I always remember standing outside Dáil Éireann actually, because his office was just up the road from it. But I had a bigger plant originally, and just before I was about to deliver to him, I thought to myself, they're going to dump this. So I cut a twig off it. I got a smaller pot and I shoved it down into it. And it was still fine the next morning. It was still drawing up moisture, etc. So I tried to deliver the plant to the minister. And at that point, guards basically, like the Walking Dead, all of a sudden started surrounding me. I was brought down to Pearse Street, Garda station. And I always remember a comment from a senior guard in there when I was being brought in. He just briskly walked by me. He goes, "You've really fucking done it now, Ming, haven't you?" So anyways, I was brought into Pearse Street Garda station, and they were absolutely sound to me, in fairness to them. And in many cases they aren't. And I've had experience of that too, but it's best just to say exactly what happened. They were really, really sound to me. And they actually thought it was a bit of crack. I was as in a bit of fun as opposed to the drug. And I was brought in, I was fingerprinted. And it's that long ago now that I'm not going to get anyone in trouble. But when they were photographing me, you know, they photograph you against something to see how tall you are, etc.
Yeah.
Not only did I have my photograph taken, we had several members of the Garda Síochána also, and there wasn't mobile phones with cameras on them at the time, so they had to put a bit of effort into this. They also got photos with me standing beside the thing that measured me. So it was a bit of crack. I was put into a cell, and I don't know what the cells are like in the Garda stations now, but they were horrible at the time. They were a hole in the ground and they wouldn't be particularly clean. So I was left there for a couple of hours. And then I was let out, and I think in the following 48 hours, I think I did something like 67 radio interviews, 67 interviews rather, with every local radio station, every local newspaper, every national TV, etc. So in those interviews, I was asked, why did you do it? And at the time, there was an anthrax scare. So inevitably, they try and drag the story in a different direction. You know, people were scared. They didn't know what was in it. My name was on the outside. There was a stamp on the outside to say it's National Legalized Cannabis Day, not National Post-Anthrax Day to people. And there was comments made by a couple of local politicians here that it was a disgrace and we were terrified. I got one phone call from a TD that claimed by the name Noel, not Grealish, but by the name Noel, a Fianna Fáil TD, who on the line left a message on my phone. He goes, "You're some whoreman, you're some whoreman, send that to us." And then he hung up. He goes, "This is Noel, whatever. There's a few Noels, so I won't hang him." So it created quite a lot of discussion. And from the point of view of a marketing exercise, you know, some people called it a stunt. And I was very quick to challenge that on the radio because I said, would you call Guinness saying Guinness is good for you a stunt? Would you call a glass of Guinness down an ostrich's neck in a cartoon picture a stunt? No, you'd call it marketing. That's what you would call it. And that's exactly what it was. And basically, it got a discussion going on whether cannabis should be legalized or not. But you have to say, disappointingly, in an Irish context, 20 years later, the law is still the same. I'm not sure exactly how many people are prosecuted every year, but even if it's only around 5,000, that's 100,000 people whose lives have been, well, if you want to become a nurse, want to become a doctor, want to become a pilot, want to get custody of your kids, it's had a massively negative impact on their lives. And also in 20 years, we've lost billions in tax revenue. And also in 20 years, we've had hundreds of thousands of people who are underage exposed to using drugs because there's no regulation on them. We've had hundreds of thousands of people at this stage who, let's say they were in college and they wanted to go off and get a bit of cannabis and their dealer didn't have any, who have now been exposed to speed, which is, sorry, maybe some people might like this, but excuse my language, it's pure shit. We've had people who've used that and they never would have come in contact with it. I never would have come in contact with any other drug, most likely, if cannabis was legalized. So we have made the lives of young people in the last 20 years infinitely more dangerous as a result of it. So 20 years on, not a lot has changed in Ireland, are falling, but we are in that line of dominoes and they are falling. And as anyone knows, unless they're badly constructed, dominoes will knock every one of them down eventually. So we're getting there slowly but surely. But 20 years, it's basically nearly 8,000 days, a lot of grey hairs since, and we're still in the same position. But in the meantime, I've had the first ever bill in the whole of the European Union, in any parliament put in there. Since then, I have not campaigned as much on the legalization of cannabis. And this has been deliberate. And the reason why is, I think, and I keep saying this, the best way I can, it's not like no one knows that I want cannabis legalized. It's not like people don't know my opinion on it. Yeah. And you don't want to appear like a broken record. But there are important things other than cannabis in people's lives, in other people's lives, and people that I represent. And the worst thing I could do for when it comes to getting cannabis legalized is to do nothing but to campaign for the legalization of cannabis. Talk about nothing else. And what I have attempted to do is to try and prove that as someone who uses cannabis and doesn't abuse cannabis, I can live a very fulfilling life. Yep. I can live a very constructive life, and I can live a life that's full of motivation and full of delivering things. And what I've tried to do is help people in other areas, whether that be try to have more sustainable farming, more sustainable agriculture when it comes to the Common Agricultural Policy, or whether it comes to whistleblowers in the Gardaí, or whether it comes to recycling, or whether it comes to other areas. So what I've tried to do is, well, prove that, well, if you are someone who uses cannabis, and you don't abuse it, you can lead a perfectly normal, productive life. And I think that in itself lets people, people will look at me, whether it be someone in agriculture who now, as a result of an amendment in the European Parliament, will take money off the Larry Goodmans of the world and put it into ordinary farmers' pockets. They're now more likely to listen to me by a country mile, pardon the pun, than if I hadn't done all of that stuff. So
Yeah.
I'm campaigning to legalize cannabis in a roundabout way now, which is just as effective. But now that I have completed a lot of work on cap reform, etc., I will be more proactive in the coming years on it. And I am working on something at the moment that in the new year will be just as interesting as National Legalized Cannabis Day was 20 years ago.
Excellent. I look forward to that. And I have to commend you on your work over the years, Ming, because while you said, you had to put the cannabis thing on the back bench, you were just really being realistic about the issue. And I know up in your own area, you had a lot of stuff going on with the bogs and a lot of other issues going on there that you were quite passionate about as well. And I have to say, like, it was a real breath of fresh air to have people like yourself present within the dial, because some of those other dinosaurs, they were absolutely painful to listen to. But one thing I think as well that you have proven as well is the gateway theory around cannabis. But it's not the one the prohibitionists might want you to believe. It's that cannabis actually could be a gateway to a political career, in that if you fall on the wrong side of the law, that actually could make you question things and want to right that wrong. Much like myself, I found myself running in a local election here as well, to kind of follow in your footsteps, I suppose, as well, to become a TD. Quite passionate on this one issue, but also taking under my wings then other issues that were befalling others within my own area, who feel that they weren't being represented by the parties too. So there's definitely a bit of a proven link there between cannabis and being a gateway, but to politics, not to other drugs.
Well, yeah, I could argue it's also a gateway to going out running. A gateway to last Saturday, I was out swimming in a lake and it was 9 degrees in it, but I can do things like that as well. So it's, I have to say, I never actually did any exercise before I started smoking cannabis. So if you were to follow on from the logic that ignoring the difference between causation and correlation, I'd be going out making extraordinary claims that if you use cannabis, it makes you go swimming in cold water. And in fact, it doesn't. It just happens to be a coincidence. But there's one thing it does prove is it doesn't stop you doing any of these things. And for me, for someone who I've suffered from depression all my life, my mother did, my father-in-law did, 2 out of my 4 grandparents were given forced shock therapy in the 70s and in the 80s. And for me, it really, really helps me. And now I know how to use it in such a way that it helps me. But I tell you one thing that would help even further, if it was legal and you knew specifically and exactly what you were using, that you knew the CBD levels, you knew the THC levels, because we hear a lot of talk about, oh, the cannabis nowadays, it's got really high THC levels in comparison to CBD. Do you think cannabis users want that? They don't want that. In the same way as someone who liked to drink during Prohibition in the United States, they didn't want to drink melted down boot polish. They didn't want to drink something that they didn't know the percentage of, and then they end up with alcohol poisoning. Yep. They wanted regulation. They wanted it to be more safe. So, look, the health argument about it is definitely bunkum when it comes to having it illegal. It makes it far more dangerous. Anything that's illegal is more dangerous. And I've used, when I used to go around the universities and talk about this topic, I used to use this thing called my apple tart theory. And apple tart or apple pie, we call it apple tart in our house. Some people call it apple pie. But to me, it's the symbol of the least harmful thing ever. And it's like the most cozy, homely thing you can think of. But if you made apple tarts illegal, and some people said to me, sure, why would you do that? Well, sure, why would you make cannabis illegal? Where's your argument there? But if you were to make apple tarts illegal, what would happen? Would they be harmless anymore? No, they wouldn't. They wouldn't be regulated. The people who would make them, because I would want apple tart anyway, because I like it, they would still be made And if I didn't make them myself, I wouldn't know what was happening in the places where they were made. I wouldn't know whether the person making them was picking their nose, whether they were scratching their arse, whether they washed their hands before they kneaded the dough. I wouldn't know whether they decided to go down the road of, well, you know what, these turnips are cheaper than apples, and they make them with turnips, and they pack it with sugar to save themselves money. And I wouldn't know what was in them. And also, I could make an argument for banning them, because if you eat too much apple tart, you will end up obese.
Yep.
And there is a connection between obesity and mental illness. So you can make an argument that anything can cause mental illness, anything can cause physical problems to your body. And if apple tart was illegal, it would cause those problems too. So the argument that, oh, well, it's harmful, it's all based on the fact that it's illegal. And also, when I'd be buying the apple tarts, given that it'd be on the black market, you never know, they might want to sell me a bit of speed as well, because there's money in that too.
You probably eat it a bit faster anyway, and that you want more pies.
well, actually, no. My experience of it as a young man was you wouldn't eat much of the apple tart. You might think about it, but you'd never eat it.
Yeah, no, that's a very good comparison to make. Anything that's prohibited, and if there's demand there for it by the public, it's going to be exponentially more dangerous for those consumers then in that prohibited market than if you were to just regulate it and allow people. Because again, we do allow people to make choices around, again, sugar. It's another dangerous, more very abused substance out there. But we don't regulate people's consumption of that. We educate them about the dangers, the harms of over-consuming, about the potentials for abuse. And we hope then they'll make better decisions. And if they don't, imagine if a person arrived into a hospital and they were obese and they were judged, oh, you were eating too much sugar, go on away, we're not going to treat you now. Because that's kind of how we look upon people who say consume cannabis. It's like, oh, well, it's your own fault now, you've fallen on the wrong side of the law, you deserve what you're getting there. But it's like, well, no, I didn't choose this. When I consumed cannabis, I didn't choose to enjoy this. And it's not a problem until you get caught with it. And it's a big issue out there. But definitely, I have to go back to something on your own. When you got caught and you ended up inside in prison after you brought, inside in the cell, up in the guard station that time, afterwards, like 65 interviews, you said, happened online. But I don't know if you know that saying, she didn't want anybody
yes,
to know.
I do indeed. Yeah.
Excellent, yeah, I don't need to explain it. So, but I think actually maybe you might have been the first Barbara Streisand. We should have been calling it the Luke Ming Flanagan effect.
Yeah, why not? Why not? Actually, something interesting out of that, and I found it my father's reaction funny, because sometimes you think your parents don't know you as much as they do. And now I'm a parent myself, I know exactly how well you know people better than they do themselves, looking back. When I came home that weekend after it, I always remember go down for a bucket of turf in my parents' house for my mother. And I walked by my father and he was planing a door for someone. And he said to me, he says, "Yeah, whore," he says, "I know what you're going to do now." He says, "You're going to insist that they arrest you for this, aren't you? That you're going to be brought to court." And I had a plan. I even wrote to the Department of Justice, wrote to the DPP saying, "Where's my court case?" Because I wanted a court case, because I wanted to bring this further. I wanted to take it to the nth degree. At that stage, I hadn't been to prison for it or anything like that. So basically, I goaded them into trying to prosecute me. And I got a letter back from the DPP saying no prosecution will take place as a result of this, even though I openly admitted to possession. I openly admitted to supply, because I sent it to people. I openly admitted to cultivation. So in every sense, I should have been thrown in prison for life, going by their own rules. But it never happened. And my plan when I went to court was to copy that event, which I believe it started off a split in the church, where your man went up to the door and nailed this proclamation to the door. So what my plan was, on the day of the court case, because it would have been in Dublin, because the offence took place in Dublin, was that to have a drawn up an act similar to the one that I was going to put through Dáil Éireann, and have it on basically a scroll, and to have a very big nail and a hammer and to hammer it into the door of the court and to walk in. But as my father said, I know you're trying to goad them into getting them to bring you to court so you can do all this again. He was bloody right, I can tell you. But it never happened. But to this date, I have a letter from the DPP saying that you're not going to prosecute me, even though I've admitted to possession of cannabis, admitted to.
Jeez,
So,
that's hilarious. I'm in a very
so
similar position right now at the moment, given that I've engaged in a number of actions over the last 12 months.
yeah, I've been following you, Martin. Fair dues.
Yeah, I've seen you've shared a few of the things. Thanks very much for that, Ming. But it would have started last August with the very first one, and it was after the Gardaí showed up in heavy numbers at a protest I organised here in Cork City. We had about just over 200 people in a small field, a nice peaceful event. It was kind of a bring your own bud picnic in the park protest, encouraging people to engage in civil disobedience in large numbers, a little bit of safety there. But it was a great day. We just got past our 420 kind of smoke up at that point where everybody engaged in the protest. And the guards came in. It was like 7 vehicles across a public walk pathway. And they
Sounds like a party I was at years ago. Yeah,
they created a panic. The crowd that was there, one or two just started running, and then everyone started running. You know how that happens. You know, one runs, everybody starts running. So the Gardaí created a kind of a danger there really to the public in the way in which they came in, because they could have came in at any point. One or two guards just came up and said, "Hey, what's going on here?" They said they came because of COVID regulations, but we weren't in any large numbers. There was social distancing there.
And you were outdoors.
And we were outdoors, exactly. So following that, and there's a video up online of that kind of all unfolding. But after that, then I was just like, right, we went into the city. I brought a pot with some soil in it and a bag of cannabis seeds. And I had a megaphone there. And the guards actually sent down 6 members of the guards. They had a police car down there and a paddy wagon going up and down the road as well there, just to watch me and the couple of people that showed up on the day. But we invited people to plant seeds in the pot. And then after about an hour or so of doing that, and people done it in front of the video. So there's a video of like members of the public, just your average Joe, just coming over, supporting the campaign, planting a seed in civil disobedience. I marched to the guard station then with that pot, and that was my first act of civil disobedience, going to the guard station with a pot full of cannabis seeds, told them what had happened, told them there was cannabis seeds planted there, and that was an act of cultivation. So I was actively engaged in cultivation of cannabis. I've still not got a date for a court date, and that's 15 months ago now. And since then, in January this year, I embarked upon a promise. I kind of made my New Year's resolution, if you will. It was to engage in at least one act of civil disobedience every month this year. And I've done that so far, and today is going to be another one of those days.
Brilliant. That's great to hear. It's and as I will be going back, basically in the new year, there'll be something coming up along the lines of civil disobedience from myself for the first time in a long time. But from the point of view of in the European Parliament, the ball is starting to roll on this. I'm now working with 2 Maltese MEPs,
Okay.
one from the S&D, the Socialists and the Democrats, or the Progressives as they call themselves, and the other from the EFA, or the Green Group over there. And we are now at the moment setting up an inter-group committee in the European Parliament to lobby for the legalization of cannabis. And there's also one for medical purposes already set up, and I'm involved with them. I wasn't actually a founding member of that. I'm a member of it, but the new recreational one, I'm a founding member with 2 other MEPs. At the moment, we're talking to MEPs in the EPP group, and we're talking to MEPs in ECR, and in basically anyone we find palatable, not the ID group, because let's be honest, they're just out and out racist. So they can, I don't particularly want to associate with them, but the ball is starting to roll on it now in the European Parliament. And our motivation, myself and the 2 other MEPs have set up this group, is we're just looking at what's happened in the United States of America, and then we're just comparing what's happened in the European Union. And we are in the dark ages in comparison to it. But as you probably know, good news from Luxembourg, and they are legalizing cannabis. And good news for me too, in that I drive through it once every month.
Lucky
So
you.
I'll
But
definitely be stopping off in Luxembourg
yeah,
this
but
time.
even driving through, it's not much benefit. You'll have to call by to somebody's house because over there it's still kind of illegal. You get a small, tiny fine. It's like €25, I think, if you get caught with less than 3 grams outside in public.
Yeah,
So there's still kind of a few issues there to be ironed
it's
out, but it's definitely a step in the right direction.
yeah, it's baby steps. It's
Yeah,
baby steps, but we know where they're going. And if the interesting thing about there is, I mean, if they ever did go down the road of full legalization and selling it in shops,
yeah,
it'll be the crossroads of Europe, and the rest of them are just going to have to
yeah.
follow them, because people from basically every country surrounding it, massive populations of people. I mean, it's not like they're not going to cross the invisible border and use
Yeah.
it. So, the fact that they're doing this in Luxembourg now, the fact that they have, well, since the mid 70s in the Netherlands, they have the policy of tolerance, and they are looking at legalizing it. It's coming. And I think the thing that will ultimately break it is, and it's a bit sad it has to be like this, is that when it's legalized on a federal level in the United States of America, and then you have the situation whereby it's beamed into everyone's living rooms through their sitcoms or whatever, and people are, they're having a cup of coffee, or they're having a beer, or they're having a spliff, and it'll become normal.
Hmm.
And I've said this before, and I think it's probably one of the best analogies you can have. It'll be a bit like, them evil silk stockings that they seen on the silver screen in the 50s. They made their way to Ireland. Ireland, where basically being sexy was illegal,
Yeah.
and we seen it, we copied it, and as they say, you've got to see it to be it.
Yeah.
Well, we're going to see it on 80% of our television programs when it's legalized at a federal level.
Yes.
And at that point, it just becomes farcical. I mean, how do you explain it to people that, the equivalent of the modern day Rachel and Friends is smoking a spliff?
Yeah.
How do you explain that in Ireland, not only can you not do what Rachel is doing, we'll take your children off you in Ireland if you do it. Like, I mean, at that stage, it just becomes so noticeably farcical that the dam will break, and it will break. And we're getting ready for that with the group that we put together in the European Union. And we're trying to make it as cross-party as possible. And we've had a little bit of interest from an MEP close to home.
Really?
But I'll say nothing about it yet.
Okay, yeah, I've a few suspicions
And
there,
not
but
one of the predictable ones.
can I ask me on a European level, as in reference to Ireland, Gino Kenny's going to be publishing a bill very soon, the Cannabis Regulation and Control Bill. But I was speaking with him on Tuesday evening, and he was giving us a few updates. The bill is going to be drafted by a group above in the Dáil, who help politicians draft bills, the legal side
Yes.
of it. But he brought up something that was interesting, and I think I think there's a lot of truth to it, given Luxembourg's position and even Malta, who you mentioned, because Luxembourg and Malta are embarking upon allowing for the production of cannabis, and even in Malta they're looking for provide avenues in which people can source it, but there's still elements of criminalisation there being retained, and I wonder, is that because of pressures there from the European level, from groups like the International Narcotics Control Board, do they kind of influence countries and kind of restrict them from legislating for the legalisation of cannabis? Could you fill us in there?
They would. Well, I'll put it like this: there'd be more pressure coming against than there would the other direction. And yeah, that is correct. And I think that's the reason why it's so important that, okay, we're not going to get cannabis legalized all over Europe by setting up this group. But what we do is, if there's no pressure in the other direction, and other politicians don't see any pressure in the other direction, in most cases, in my experience, politicians aren't agents of change. Politicians are, in my experience, agents of the status quo. So if you see a change coming in a certain direction, and you see a build up of MEPs coming in the other direction, unfortunately, politicians like Tony Benn said, we want politicians to be a signpost, not a weather vane. Well, us few signposts will make them go the way the wind is blowing eventually. Unfortunately, if the wind was blowing in the other direction, they go that way as well. But the wind is starting to blow in that direction. And one thing politicians like is to be popular.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very popular. It's very, very popular. Likewise, if it was popular, I'll be honest, to hang people, for possession of cannabis. The same ones who'd be in favor of legalizing it because it's popular, they'd be tying the noose.
Yeah.
So you need leaders in this, and we need some people to lead. So myself and these MEPs are going leading on it. And I think that's what politicians should do. But you're right, there is pressure in the other direction, and there is pressure from the UN, not quite as much, but it's the pushback is happening.
Yeah.
And one thing we like in the European Union, and it's not deserved at times, is that we're so much more progressive than the rest of the world, and we're leading the world. And in a way, to me, I'll be honest with you, and this is my mildly Eurosceptic hat on, that it's a bit like European nationalism. You know, like we're so great. In other words, we're better than everyone else at doing things. No, we're not. But we like to think that. And now that the winds of acceptability is blowing in the direction of legalization, and now that the US is doing it, and oh my God, they're awful backward trogs. Look, they voted for Trump, and even now they're sort of heading back in that direction. The last thing the European Union wants to be seen as is less progressive than the United States of America. Maybe not for the right reason either, but that is where the momentum is coming from, I think. Mm-hmm. And even from talking to the MEPs who were involved in this group, I got a bit of that off them as well, that, geez, we can't have the United States doing it, and we won't do it. It'll make us look bad. So whatever the motivation is, it's going in the right direction. And I think we're looking at, who knows, 10, maybe 15 years, I think this will be done and, pardon the pun, dealt with. Yeah. And we can move on from what is a sad chapter in human history, where we, for spurious reasons, stop people from using cannabis. You know, and that time is coming. And I would have said for years, you know, initially when I got involved in this, I would have said, oh yeah, this will happen within 5 years. Then after about 5 years, I thought, you know, this is never actually going to happen. But I would be of the frame of mind now, and I think it's hard to argue with it, that it's cannabis is coming home. Okay?
Yeah. Can I ask, you brought up the UN there, Ming, and much like your bill in 2013 gave us so much hope, recently there was a vote by the UN going back to around this time last year. You're probably well aware of it. They were looking, there was recommendations made by, again, the World Health Organization of all organizations, who we were supposed to like follow up like to the letter on the whole COVID kind of thing. They made certain recommendations around descheduling or rescheduling cannabis, removing it from the more restrictive categories there, Schedule 4 and Schedule 1, and putting it into less restrictive categories, which would have opened up the health professionals working with it and the researchers working with it. But I kind of followed that whole thing, and I watched how the votes unfolded there. And I have to say that they weren't following the science, the evidence, the facts that were laid before them. And when you look at how the votes went, you can kind of see some level of corruption there. There were certain voting blocks that it was within their favour to kind of keep cannabis prohibition illegal. One of those being the Chinese. Like that, they're the largest producers of the cannabis plant in the world, albeit for the hemp fibers. They're definitely exploring avenues now into the medicinal side of it to profit there. But keeping the prohibition in place is incredibly beneficial for them, because if me or you can't grow this plant for ourselves, then anything they have, we will need, like if that's going to be what's going to be the source of ailing your symptoms. So I can't help but feel that there's some level of corruption there within the UN and even within the European things, because the evidence it's undeniable. Cannabis being a Schedule 1 drug, it means there's little to no evidence for the medicinal use and a high potential for abuse. But that is not correct. That is not true in any shape or form about cannabis, the plant.
Well, look, I think the big issue here is money. And at the moment, certain people have this money, whether it's the illegal market, and people might say, well, you know, they don't control the laws. Well, money controls the laws. And people who have an awful lot of money have an awful lot of influence. And it isn't young lads chopping up 9 bars and selling it who are making billions out of this. They're the ones who are they're the victims of it at the end of the day. It's very, very rich people with access to an awful lot of money. And likewise, when it comes to medicinal, there are other substances being used to treat ailments that cannabis can and will replace. And that's more money that someone is not going to have in their hands. And then when it moves over to being treated with cannabis, that's another market that they're trying to take over and dominate so that ordinary people can't do it. So the motivation is money, and that is corruption, because it's corruption to put money before people's health. It's corruption to put money before people's liberty and their right not to have a criminal record for having a smoke. So, but at the same time, you can see that, it was a slam dunk before. I mean, there was no arguing even at the UN, but there was some debate this time.
There was,
and
yeah.
there were people pushing in the opposite direction. So, but while the UN maintains that stance, it's very difficult for any country to do anything about it, or it's very difficult for any country to kick back against it, because they're afraid that it'll cause them problems in other areas. And in particular, a country like Ireland that's so dependent on the pharmaceutical industry for jobs and for corporate tax. I mean, Ireland is the last country that feels comfortable with giving the pharmaceutical industry a poke in the ribs, even if at the end of the day it's better for the people's health. And don't get me wrong, there are lots of pharmaceutical companies out there producing absolutely amazing drugs. All I can say is it's a pity there wasn't a pharmaceutical company around there that produced the polio vaccine before my aunt got polio many years ago. So I'm not this black and white, big pharma bad, cannabis good, but I have to say there's a lot of rubbish stuff goes on, and the motivation isn't health all the time. The motivation is shareholders, and the motivation is basically greed, and that's not what we should be driven by. So, if all was fair and all was equal and everything was logical, the UN wouldn't be doing this. And all the UN do is damage their own credibility, because they have a big job when it comes to climate change. They have a big job when it comes to bringing peace to this ball that we live on. But I mean, if the UN at the same time is saying 2 and 2 is 5 and banging their fist and saying that's it, we have decided, now we voted, 2 and 2 is 5, and you have to accept that. Well, then, even though on other areas they might be right, people are likely to call bullshit on it. And even in a bigger area, if people can see that this is quite clearly wrong, I think it leads certain people down a road of becoming conspiracy theorists on everything. And that's not good for people either. And I can understand how people will become like that, because, I mean, if they can lie to me about something like this, they might lie to me about something else. Yep. And in many cases, they're not. But how do you know? How do you differentiate? So it creates a mistrust on so many levels. And when the UN are doing it, it's like, well, what should I believe? And to the point that now some people don't even believe in the existence of gravity.
Yeah, no, I definitely do think that there's some addition to the vaccine hesitancy out there by this distrust in the government because of how people were lied to around a lot of all of the illegal drugs. You look at cannabis, psilocybin mushrooms, and some of the other banned substances there, but we're now seeing the incredible therapeutic benefits of some of these substances. So of course people are going to be distrustful then of the people who've been lying to them all the time over then. But I think the biggest harms done there is not around the vaccine hesitancies, to the young people who are supposed to be educating and helping to reduce harms later on in life when they do kind of grow up to interact with these substances, that hopefully they're armed with proper education and not distrustful of the people giving them that education, and then therefore curiosity sadly killing the cat then in certain cases, and that has happened here in Ireland, like sadly, because of this ignorance. We hear a lot about at the moment protecting the vulnerable. Where was that before, when there was students crying out for drug testing at nightclubs and festivals because of problems with pills? Where was that care and compassion to the vulnerable people then? There was not.
Ronald Reagan's wife, Nancy Reagan, the former president of the United States of America,
just say no.
She at this campaign, just say no, no. But I think the best twist on that though was changing it to just say no, KNOW, because knowledge is everything. And there are people out there that cannabis doesn't suit, and I know them. and they shouldn't use it, and they don't use it.
Yeah.
And but in an environment where it is prohibited, that people are, I find people are more resistant to the idea that maybe it doesn't suit everyone,
Yeah.
because it's nearly seen as giving up and you prove them right, when in fact, look, tea doesn't suit everyone, sugar doesn't suit everyone, and playing video games doesn't suit everyone. Some people just can't stop. So it all depends on the individual. So look, I think the best thing, anyways, well, no matter what you're doing, is to be honest about it and tell people the truth. And if they do that on cannabis, without doubt, it will be this thing of think of the children. Well, if you're thinking of the children, legalize, regulate, and tax. That is the future, if you really care about the health of children. And I have 3 children.
Yeah.
In the past, when I started this, people would say, oh, well, if you had children, you think different. Now that I have children, I am actually more determined in my assertion that keeping my children safe means regulating cannabis and taking it out of the hands of people who would be, not in all cases, but maybe very unscrupulous in the way they deal with it.
Yeah, I've 2 daughters myself, and we're expecting a 3rd child in any minute now. I could literally get called away with ourselves, so water could break. But yeah, I definitely would see that from that perspective. The harm reduction benefits there, they incredibly outweigh the any benefits of keeping a prohibition in place. But one very unlikely, somebody you wouldn't suspect to be a campaigner for the legalisation of all drugs would be Anne-Marie Cockburn of anyone's child. Her 14-year-old daughter, Martha, she's over in the UK. She sadly passed away because of incredibly potent MDMA, which she was able to get at 14 years of age. And she's now a campaigner for the legalisation of all drugs. She believes her daughter, first of all, wouldn't been able to get access to MDMA had it been controlled and be available through a regulated outlet. But secondly, the potency then, she believes her daughter would have been much more aware of the dose relationship there, as she had no way of being able to tell from the unregulated environment. So she believes that even in a regulated environment, should her daughter have gotten it, she would be still alive today with us and probably celebrating what would be, I think maybe her 19th birthday this year, sadly. But yeah.
Yeah, she'd basically be the same age as my. I know the case. She'd be the same age as my old eldest daughter now.
Isabel.
And I'd have to say, if I was that lady, because when you have kids, you'll do anything for them. I mean, nothing else matters. Probably not a healthy way to be, but nothing else does matter. So if you were in the situation like she was in, I have to say, you'd have to admire her for being able to think that clearly, because anger may cloud that thinking. Because I would be very, very angry. But the idea, she is doing a massive service to her daughter, because the reality is, if prohibition wasn't there in the first place for that substance, her daughter would be alive now. Because as you say, no one knows the dose, and no one knows the real facts about it. No one knows, is it pure? What else was in it?
Yeah.
Was it MDMA? Was there speed mixed in it? What else was mixed in it? And in a legal environment, you know all of that. You know exactly what it is. And you can also be very strong about what the dangers are of it as well. You can say, well, this can happen to you with it, and you must be careful. You don't have to exaggerate it or anything like that. So if ever there was a case whereby to show that prohibition is a bad idea with these substances, there it is, and we're really lucky to have someone like that is calm enough and knows that the answer isn't more prohibition and more coming down on young people and more criminalizing them, and most importantly, more turning young people against the guardians of the peace, who, if it wasn't for this, young people would have a far better relationship with them. And then if a crime takes place, they'd feel more comfortable going to them. People wouldn't be saying, oh, you were talking to the police. So why wouldn't you talk to the police? They're there in theory to protect us. Yep. And if we didn't have these laws, it would build the relationship between young people and the Gardaí, and we would have far less problems in other areas, far less problems with vandalism, far less problems with all other crime. Because if someone is robbing someplace At the moment, people just mistrust the police because, well, I got in trouble with them previously because of cannabis. Whereas if it was legal, people would feel more comfortable talking to them.
Yeah, no, you're dead right.
And that can't be bad for anyone.
No, and Luke, I'm very aware of your time as well. I've had you here for almost an hour. I might imagine you've had a very busy day ahead.
It's a pleasure.
But before I leave you go, I just want to just bring to your attention just the letter. So you'll be receiving one of these very soon. This is our National Legalised Cannabis Day. So yeah, that's it there. And I tried to.
Oh, you have the fist with the leaf in it.
I tried to recreate it as best as I could.
All right. Who did it originally? But it's a really good symbol. You did a good job.
Yeah, thanks. I just. I
noticed one councillor saying, "Don't forget about me." I thought that was quite funny.
Yeah, I love that, and I made sure to include her in the that. And what we're going to be sending out, we have a disclaimer here on this, and I don't know if you can see the disclaimer there just towards the end. But on that, it just highlights the fact that we've included the cannabis joint, but it's from an unregulated market, so they don't even you can't be assured if it's cannabis in it. So there's some politicians going to be getting joints of parsley, there's others going to be getting maybe some oregano, and then there's others getting some cannabis leaf, and there's one or two selected, and I won't mention any names, but they're going to get some primo Cork grown cannabis grown by a local supporter of the campaign here, who's donated some what's called purple godbud. Very nice, really tasty.
All right, yeah, I have to say I really like the purple strains. I like the smell of them. And you know what I like about them in particular? To me anyway, they tend to be, they've got a good spectrum of the cannabinoids in them.
Yeah.
Generally the ones that I have used. Actually, when I used to grow cannabis in Ireland, I used to grow, I'm trying to remember the name, but a particular purple strain, and it grew really, really, really well in Ireland. So, some people think you need to live in exotic climes to grow cannabis outdoors in Ireland, when actually you just need to find the right strain. So, I'm looking forward to the reaction from all your postal activities. So,
thanks very much. I have to thank you as well for the inspiration for this. 20 years ago, I don't think you would have thought you would be where you are today, or that there would be others out there kind of recreating your events.
Not. I'd never be that arrogant to think I'd have got 128,000 votes. That's for sure. So,
well, it's a credit to you. Well deserved, every one of them, honestly, Ming. And if I could have voted for you out there, I would have too.
Well, thank you very much. Well, you might get the chance to vote for me at some stage. If Bertie Ahern ever runs for president, I'm running against him.
Yes. Ming for president, you heard it here first, folks.
All right, Martin.
Ming,
listen,
thanks very much again.
To talk to you, as always, okay?
Definitely, until we meet again. Bye, Ming.
Bye.
So there we go, guys. Luke Ming Flanagan. What an absolute pleasure. Blown away, just honestly, really impressed with that conversation there. Now, I really enjoyed it. I hope you all did out there as well. I got in touch with him earlier on in the week. I have to give a shout out as well to the Twitter Cork Cannabis Club, who reminded me of this. I wouldn't have even been aware about this 20-year anniversary of this if it wasn't for the Cork Cannabis Club. He didn't even know it was the 20th anniversary when he was reminding me of it, and I was just kind of looking. I was like, that's 2001. This is 2021. That's 20 years. We have to do something about this. So that was just over a week ago, and here we are now, just over a week later. Over 200 of these letters ready to go, printed front and back. 10 reasons why cannabis prohibition needs to end. Recreating an action carried out there by our very own MEP Luke Ming Flanagan 20 years ago. So yeah, it's amazing, and it's great to hear as well, this development there within the European Parliament, that Luke Ming Flanagan is going to be working with other MEPs on this kind of cannabis task force, if you will. That's great to hear. So hopefully that will help speed things up there in the future. As we talked about, there is definitely external pressures on Ireland, which are going to kind of impede upon our ability to legalise cannabis here. At least that was what was said by Gino the other night. But despite that, I believe Gino is still going to push on hard to get cannabis legalised here in Ireland. So fingers crossed, guys. I'm feeling very optimistic now about today's actions and about the future for cannabis in Ireland. We have to push hard, guys. You heard it there from Ming himself. You know, like he engaged in these campaigns over 20 years ago, and like when the cops arrested him, 65 interviews, guys. Like you could effectively say like that Ming's actions, like, and that's not to under kind of right any other actions that he's engaged in, and I meant to thank him actually for his contributions on the CAP, the CAP there within the European Parliament, the Common Agricultural Programme, I believe it's called. But you know, he's I definitely believe that his actions around cannabis legalization all those years ago kind of springboarded him into the position he is now today. You know, it gave him the kind of platform, the attention, and then he kind of went off, focused on other issues. As I've kind of, you know, took my hat to, like he was being realistic at the time. If he was just going to be this one-trick pony and fight for cannabis legalization and always be shouting for it, then he was constantly going to be degraded. And you know how that goes, guys. You know, oh, you're a stoner, and never mind that guy, that's the cannabis guy. You know, and he's very, it's very true. He kind of gave into the stigma at the time, and he was like, right, I'm going to show you. I'm going to kind of, you know, I'm going to be this straight flying guy. I'm not going to smoke cannabis in Ireland. You know, I'm not going to always call for cannabis legalization. We're going to play the long game in this. And that's what he did. And he played a blinder, in fairness to him. Like, look where he is. He went from Lord Mayor to TD to fucking MEP. So honestly, tip my hat to the guy. Like, well done, Luke Ming Flanagan, man. You played a blinder. Really flying the flag for us in the cannabis community. Because, you know, just showing that we're not fucking unmotivated, lazy, no good, uneducated. You know, we're none of that. We are none of that. There might be some of us within our community that might fucking fit some of those boxes, but cannabis doesn't make them that. They were just fucking that anyway. So yeah, guys, I hope you really enjoyed that one. I'll be back live again later on today. I'm going to be making a trip up to Clonmel. Going to be visiting with Relief, the cannabis cafe above there, the Artisan Coffee CBD bar. But yeah, we'll be going above there, and we're going to be posting these out. So basically, as the TDs will get their envelope, their letter, they'll slide it out, and they'll be met with National Legalised Cannabis Day. Then they will open her up. And I forgot to tell Luke, actually, not to be worried about COVID with the joints that are going out, because all the joints are COVID compliant. They've not been licked. They've been wet with a cotton bud and some distilled water. So yeah, I forgot to tell him that. But yeah, once they open up this letter, then inside in the folds there will be maybe a jelly and a joint. The two J's. So it should be interesting. I really do look forward to the responses and of this campaign, to see if any TDs kind of speak out about it, any of the councillors or any of the media outlets that are getting them as well. Again, much like Ming, we've going to target the TDs, senators, councillors and media. So we've Neil Prendable's getting some, PJ Coogan here in Cork. We got the Cork guys done. We got Niall Boyle in there as well, so that's all the radio done. We're even getting some to Paul Byrne, to Nicola Tallant, so some of the crime reporters out there. So hopefully that should just do enough to spark the conversation there, and keep cannabis front and centre, cannabis legalisation front and centre. I see lots of comments coming in as well, guys. Yeah, appreciate all of that. I see lots of love hearts coming in as well. Appreciate that, guys. Yes, Martin, and yes, Ming for President, Martin. Nice and nice and Thomas, what? Tucker, yeah, fucking trying to think. Bridget Spalding, Ming for President, yes. Monsieur Fudge signals dead, and gone on the 3-hour hike home. Great show. Yeah, glad you enjoyed it anyway, guys, and nice one. Yeah, no real comments there, no questions there to get through. Apologies, I was just so caught up in chatting with Ming there. I pretty much just let him do all of the talking. I got my couple of questions in there that I wanted to ask, but I didn't even get a chance to go over to look at any comments that were coming in throughout the conversation. But I do appreciate it. I did see many of you have shared it. And also I see Hype there. Hype, you big legend again as always, getting in some massive support there for the show, and saying happy cannabis or happy legalized cannabis day. So legend Hype, thanks very much, pal. Others who supported the show there as well. I seen someone else getting a bit of support there earlier, and it was Podge. Podge, you big legend. Thanks very much. Podge got in an old super chat there saying, time for a change. Hashtag Cannabis Reform Ireland. So well done, Podge. Thanks very much, pal. Really appreciate the support of the show. And to everybody else who's shared, streamed, and liked, guys, thanks very much. Much appreciated. Yeah, I kind of I wanted to show Ming the joints and everything. I was like, yeah, we got some joints here at the ready, but I knew I had to let him go after I had him for the hour. I didn't want to be taking up any more of his time. But we'll definitely cross paths again, maybe in person. We'll have to travel over there to Luxembourg when he's on one of his trips through, and sit down and maybe try some of those purple strains that he spoke so fondly of. I know I would enjoy definitely sitting down having an old coffee or a herbal tea and an old herbal cigarette. So guys, stay tuned for later on today. Around the 4:20 mark, we will be back live as we post the letters to all of the TDs and senators and media across the island of Ireland on what is National Legalised Cannabis Day. First christened that 20 years ago by my guest just there, Luke Ming Flanagan. So guys, I'll be back. Stay blazed out there. Enjoy your Friday, and yeah, stay blazed. And until 4:20, much peace and love.